Hey everybody, good morning. Glad to see you guys here. Made it through the party. Didn't get taken out by a dodgeball. Cool. Well, welcome. This session is focused on the ArcGIS runtime, and it's about styling your maps. There's lots of options available to you to style your maps, and hopefully this session kind of gives you a little bit more perspective and gives you an idea of where you can start if you don't know where you need, what you can do or where you can start. So really it's all about creating beautiful and functional maps for your runtime apps. And we're not going to talk about cartography. I don't care if your streets are blue or your rivers are red. That's not what we're going to talk about. It's all about the decisions that you make with layers, symbols, renders, and labels, how they are impacted by and impact your authoring environment and your deployment environment. So with your base maps, things you got to think about is, you know what? I forgot to introduce everybody because it's Friday morning at 8:30. I'm Ralf, by the way. I work on the ArcGIS Runtime core team. And this is Lucas. He works on the Qt team. You can introduce yourself if you want now. And this is Daniel. He works also on the Runtime core team. So sorry about that. So back to maps, sorry. With base maps, the things that you need to think about is the size matter. If I'm going to be deploying my base map locally on my machine, size might be an issue if I'm using a mobile device. What about performance? Is that something that I need to worry about? Where does the base map come from? What's the purpose of it? For my reference data, do I need to use labels? Or do these labels need to be dynamic? Do they need to deconflict? Do I have special symbology requirements? Do I need to use advanced symbols or simple symbols? What are advanced symbols? We'll talk a little bit more about advanced symbols later. And then, how does my data need to be displayed? Do I actually already have a map available to me, or do I need to create one myself? And maybe I'm a developer and not a GIS guy, and I don't really know what I need to do to create this map. So we're going to go over some of those concepts. So really, you've got three major authoring environments. You have ArcGIS Online, which has these like smart mapping tools. So these smart mapping tools allow you to create and edit like really beautiful and effective web maps. And you could share these web maps online so they're accessible by all devices and every part of the system. And with ArcGIS Online, you have access to a whole bunch of data, base maps, everything. So you could just use those for your app. In Runtime, your authoring environment is an API, right? So you can programmatically create and edit existing web maps. There's also APIs that allow you to take data offline, so you can go disconnected into the field and do your work there. Or you could just use a map that you've offered in Pro, and we'll talk more about that later. Pro, obviously, is your primary authoring environment, and you've got tons of tools. You can create amazing stuff. You could share directly from Pro maps as web maps. You can create services, and certain services, you can take those offline, and then you can ultimately create a mobile map package that you can share directly with the runtime. So really what you got to think about is, what is my map going to do? Am I going to be making a map for every single app? Do I need to make a map that has to have complex symbols? Is my map going to be connected to the internet? Is it always connected to the internet? Sometimes connected to the internet? Maybe never connected to the internet? And do I have like custom data, like that a data type that the runtime doesn't necessarily support? So I had to write my own provider to consume that data. So the other thing to think about is you ultimately have three levels of functionality, right? Your desktop obviously is the most powerful tool that you have available to you. Then there's the runtime, which is a subset of functionality from desktop. And then there's the web. The web stuff has to work in a browser, so it's not going to be as powerful as the runtime or the desktop. So where's my map going to live? How am I going to use it? Do I need to use it in all three tools? Or is it just going to be for the runtime? So thinking about all these things will help you determine what tool you need to use to author your maps. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Daniel, and he's going to create a map for every app and show you how that's done.
All right, thanks, Ralph. So let's say you want to create a map that's beautiful and it renders on all devices on all ranges of DPI. The easiest and most simple method would be to do it on ArcGIS Online. So this is so what you can see on the screen right now is the screen for an organization, an ArcGIS Online organization. And how you would create such a map in ArcGIS Online is go to My Content from the home page. And then you would do Create Map. You can put the title in, some tags in, but I already made one, so I'm just going to go straight over to that one. Okay. So you have this map, and let's say for your organization's need, this map isn't to the likings of whatever your boss wanted or whatever. So how you do that, so you can then add a base map and some operation or data layers to this map. And how you do that is through this add button here, and you have multiple ways of adding a base map and operational or data layers to it. So for our purposes, we're going to go to add from the web because I already found some base maps and data that I wanted to already to use for this demo. So I copy the URL and then I say use as a base map. So one other consideration that we are going to take here is the fact that do we want to go between a raster base map or a vector tile base map? For our purposes, we want, as I said earlier, we want a map that looks great on all devices and on all DPI. So we're going to choose a vector-based map, and the reason for this will be explained by Ralf later on. So I add the base map, and this is our vector tile map. So we're going to zoom into San Francisco because that's where our data is ultimately going to be in for this demo. Okay, so now we have this, and we're going to add the operational layer, and just like the base map layer, we're going to add from the web. So this is the map with the data overlaid on top of it. But let's say you don't like the way this looks, the way the data is displayed on the map. So how you do that is you can change it by hovering over the data layer itself and going to this Change Style button. And you can now then choose the attribute to which you want the renderer to apply the symbology and all the other rendering rules to. So for this, we're just going to leave it at the request type and the request type, and we have all of these options that ArcGIS Online has provided us. So the first one is unique symbols. That one just means each symbology, each unique value determines what symbol the feature will be drawn upon. And then the other one is single symbol, so that means you have one symbology for all your points. And then heat map is part of the smart mapping features that'll also be explained later on in the presentation. So let's say I don't want all these unique values, so I'm going to choose the single symbols. And as you can see, when I selected it, it changed the symbols to this singular circle. So we can go in and change some stuff on it. So I don't like the way the circles look. So I'm going to change the symbols to make it more of a marker type. And I press OK. But it's way too small. It looks pretty much like a circle, so I'm going to change the size on it. All right, and there's some other options. As you can see, there's transparency, visible range, and all that. But but I don't really want this because obviously that's not a very good way to display data on a map. So I'm just going to go back to the unique value symbol, and just like the simple symbol, you have all these options and plus some more options just for the unique value renderers. Okay, so. I have this map, and now I'm going to just show you guys that, this map can be then consumed by the Runtime API to display a map that looks just like as how you see it on ArcGIS Online. So first I save the web map. And now I go over to my application. And I deploy it onto my Android Android emulator. And so as you can see, just like how you saw it in ArcGIS Online, it looks exactly as it is on ArcGIS Online. You can move around, zoom in, and so on and so forth. And that's the end of my demo.
Cool, thanks, Daniel. You need to switch a bit. So in this map for every app use case, basically Daniel was trying to create a map for an application, maybe a community application, where people go out in the field and they look at graffiti and then they can like report it or something. So that map needs to actually work everywhere, right? Any device, doesn't matter. So he used ArcGIS Online to create the map because one, he had fairly simple symbology requirements. He just needed to show the graffiti. So he doesn't really need to do anything more than that, and the smart mapping tools make it really easy to do that. And he chose to use a vector tile layer for the base map. And and the reason was because he wants it to look great on all platforms. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? The structure of this presentation is sort of like we're going to introduce some concepts and demos, and then we're going to talk about them afterwards. So I hope that works for you. Please let us know if it doesn't. So base maps, they provide context for your app, and they're generally not the focus. But a really nice base map will make your map really pop. You have 3 different base maps that you could choose from in the runtime. You can use raster tile layers, vector tile layers, or mobile map packages. So which one do you choose? Well, really, each one has its pluses and its minuses. And you got to pick the one that is the best base map for your app. So let's talk about raster tile layers. Raster tile layers are just data stored as images in a tile format with LODs, right? You can cook them yourself from existing maps really easily, or you could use the ones we provide on ArcGIS Online. What's cool about raster tiles is you can put them in a TPK, and then you could deploy them locally on a device and use that device disconnected. Real advantage with raster tiles is the rendering performance. It's just an image. There's no processing required. We just render it. And it's really easy to author too, because it doesn't matter what your map looks like. If you've got all the most complicated symbology and thousands of layers in your map and you want to cook that all gets flattened into an image. So no performance cost, right? And there's an export tile cache task that the APIs have available to you. So if you're using an online tiled service, you can actually call that and grab a TPK based on a given extent. The downfalls of raster tile layers is they're pretty big, right? Lots and lots of images can get pretty huge. Some of our online services, I think, are terabytes in size. And they're cooked at a specific DPI. This is kind of important, right? Because most of them, our online services, are at 96 DPI. They look great on my Windows desktop here, but if I've got my iPhone, 96 DPI could get kind of blurry. So they might not be the best choice if you need like a really, really pretty detailed base map. And everything is baked into the image, right? So if I start rotating my map around, all my labels and stuff that I've authored in my desktop, all my symbols, they're all just going to stay aligned with the image because nothing's changing, right? Vector tiles, that's data basically the same thing, right? Data stored as vectors instead of images in the same sort of tiling scheme. What's great about vector tiles is because they're vectors, they look great on any resolution device. And they're tiny because it's a lot of data. It's just vector data. It's just points, right? And we have an option when you create vector tile layers yourself to index them. And what indexing does is it smartly scans your map, and if there is a location where you don't have very much data, or any data really, we just don't make a tile for that location and use the one above. So the runtime and even JavaScript and Pro have the ability to over zoom a tile if there's no tile there. So this makes vector tiles incredibly small and very easy to deploy. And what's cool is it's sort of a dynamic sort of rendering. Your labels and points will always stay screen aligned as you rotate your map. The downfalls, though, is your authoring is actually critical for performance, right? If you have 100 layers in your vector tile layer, that's a very different story when you're actually trying to render that, because the client actually takes that data, takes the Symbology spec that gets downloaded with the vector tile layer or is in the VTBK, and has to process all that data and render it on the fly. And also, because of this, and because of the specification that we're using, there are limitations to the Symbology that you could use. So just to show this, I'm going to pass it to Lucas, who's going to do a quick little vector versus raster tile demo side by side.
Thanks, Ralph. So in this scenario here, I've created, it's kind of an extreme example, but I've created a tile package and a vector tile package in ArcGIS Pro. I've used only about 6 or 7 layers, so there's not a ton of data in this. And I'm running it here on a Samsung Galaxy S7, I think it is. So it's pretty high resolution. You can see on the right with the raster tiles, it doesn't look so great because it baked in at 96 DPI. So on the vector tile on the left, you get these nice crisp lines. On the raster tile on the right, it gets a little bit blurry. And you've probably seen this a number of times, but as you rotate the map, the label, the highway shield in this case, rotates along with it in vector, but because it's baked into the raster image, it doesn't. It spins with the entire map versus staying aligned as you'd like it. One other thing to note, in this case, it took 15 minutes to create my regular tile package. The vector tile package, it took 5 seconds. Also 5 megabytes for the vector tile package and 100 megabytes for the raster tile package. So, you know, it's a bit of an extreme example, but it gives you an idea on some of the use cases and why a vector tile package might look better for a case where you're working on a smartphone.
Cool, thanks, Lucas. Yeah, the vector tile will look better, but the smartphone also has to process that data. So what do? You decide. So what about mobile map packages? Mobile map packages are basically a packaged up ArcGIS Pro map. And it's got a base map layer in it, and you can author the base map layer, and it has your operational layers in it. You could also buy them from Esri. We have like mobile map packages for completely disconnected workflows available for purchase with street map data, and so people could do routing and everything. Navigator is an example of an app that uses mobile map packages. The advantages of mobile map packages, you can package your road networks into it. You can package your locators into it, so you could actually do completely disconnected routing and locating and searching. It preserves your map, right? Your map as it is will be exported into a runtime format that you can use, and it'll look the same. So all the symbology and all the labels are made runtime compatible. The problems about mobile map package, obviously, is same thing, size, because there's a lot of data that you're pushing in. Again, it's not as bad as vector tiles as far as performance, but your map authoring does impact performance. And mobile map packages only work for the runtime and for Pro. You can't use them through anything online. So I'll pass it back to Lucas again. He's going to show a workflow where he requires advanced symbols and offline capabilities. So he's going to make a map for that workflow.
Right, so in this scenario, let's say I'm a water utilities GIS manager, and I've got people that go out in the field, they collect data, they fix valves and mains and things like that. And so the symbology in the map is really important. The map that they look at in the field needs to look exactly the same as it does in ArcGIS Pro. So here I've got some points and lines, and there's some interesting things about these symbols. If I click on the point symbols, for example, you can see that they're multi-layered. There's several different vector layers that make up this symbol. They're not simple markers or picture markers. They actually have several different layers. And with that, I've got a polyline, a symbol that's made up of multiple layers, and this one uses arrows that go in the direction of the line. So this is really important in the case of water utilities because you want to see which way the water is flowing. Now, I also, in this scenario, my users in the field, they like working on tough books, for example. They're not really high-resolution devices. They're made to really withstand working outside. And so I would like to have imagery displayed. I'm not really too worried about cooking the tiles at a 96 DPI or anything like that because these screens aren't too great. But they like to use the imagery to have it as a reference. They might have a tree or a landmark or a house or something that they can use to verify that they're indeed in the right location. So to get this in ArcGIS Runtime, I will go to Share, Web Map, and I'll give it a name, summary, some tags. And down here, I need to select to make it editable. And then I would share that with ArcGIS Online. And what that's going to do is take all of the data in the map, publish it up as services. I'll have, actually in this case, it's a world imagery based map, and that's provided by Esri, so it's not going to republish that. It will just use that one. And then I've also got some feature layers that it will upload. So once I've done that, I can consume that in an ArcGIS Runtime app. So here I have an app made with the Qt SDK, and by default, it initially is in online mode. So as I zoom in here, the layers should start drawing. And you can see I've got the same symbology as what I had in Pro. I'm going to go ahead and click this Go Offline button because this will take just a minute. And what this is doing is it's using the geodatabase sync task and the export tile cache task to take the different data layers offline. The export tile cache task is to take the world imagery offline. And the geodatabase sync task is used to take the feature layers offline. One thing that's kind of cool is that with update 1, we're providing a new API called the offline map task. And that's going to allow you to simply give a web map and not have to specify all the individual tasks you want to manage. You just say, take this map offline, and it will take everything offline for you. But you can see here I've got my TPK now. It's just a local tile package, and I've also got a geodatabase that has my data for my feature symbols. So the cool thing about this is that it requested advanced symbols from the service so that when it came down, I still have my arrows on my lines, and I have my multi-layer point symbols as well. So pass it back to Ralf.
Cool. Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, so Lucas in this workflow created a highly specialized map, and the map was only for people in his organization. So he could either put it on a web map or host it on his own portal. He needed advanced symbology because otherwise his users wouldn't know what they're looking at. And he needed to go offline. So he used and he also used a raster tile layer because that's what people wanted to see for their workflows. And also because raster tile layers are very easy to take offline and DPI wasn't actually an issue there. So let's talk a little bit about symbology. We talked about advanced symbols and simple symbols. So what are they? Well, simple symbols are the symbols that yes? Raster tiles. Raster, yeah. So for symbology, we've got simple symbols, which are your marker, line, polygon, and picture symbols, picture marker symbols. These are the symbols that you work with when you're working with ArcGIS Online. Your advanced symbols are your desktop symbols. So they're multi-layered vector symbols. And Lucas showed that real briefly when he was showing the symbols. So this is your pro symbology. And Runtime has the ability to use both online symbols and pro symbols. So to author your symbology, if you're using ArcGIS Online, you create simple symbology. There's plenty of picture marker symbols that you could use for anything that's more complex, but when it gets to lines and polygons, you just have the simple sort of symbology to work with. Runtime, you can create simple symbols programmatically through the APIs. And in Pro, if you want to create simple symbology, you just author your web maps. And by default, it'll author to simple, but it'll also author the advanced symbology that you can optionally use in the runtime. So if you're using a feature layer, there's a flag on the feature layer to ask for the advanced symbology. Advanced symbology can only actually be authored in Pro, and it is actually enabled by default through the feature service. It's the only symbology that comes through on the mobile map package. And soon, you'll be able to author it by sharing your style file with the runtime. So lots of organizations have their own style files that they use. I used to work for the National Park Service, and we had a style file, and every time I made maps, I would use that style file. Now you'll be able to take that style file and put it on your mobile device and use those symbols directly. So I guess I'll do a quick demo of that because I think it's kind of cool. So here I've got ArcGIS Pro, and actually I need my, no. I'm holding a mic and trying to use this pad, and it's not the simplest thing. So here I have a style file with my campground symbols in it, and you could see that the campground symbols are these multi-layered symbols. You've got two shape markers that make up the symbol. Well, I've also created my own custom symbol that I want to use on my mobile device. It's this symbol. It's gators and bears. If you were at the road ahead, you might have seen this already. But basically, I needed to create a symbol that I could put on a trailhead that says, hikers, don't hike here because they're gators and bears. So what I could do with this is I could actually copy it. Well, first, I'll show you here. If I go to Styles, and I right-click and I say New, you'll be able to, in the future, create a new mobile style. And the reason why you have to create a mobile style is, yes, Runtime supports Pro Symbology, but Pro Symbology is hugely complicated and powerful. And actually, all those character marker symbols are fonts. And on a mobile device, that font might not exist. So we have to actually convert that font into a vector, and then that way you could use that symbol on your mobile device. So I can go here. This is already a style file, a mobile style file that I have created. I can paste my symbol. I get a little warning here that says, hey, I'm going to vectorize this and change a couple other properties that I'll go over later at the end. And then in here, you could see I have my gators and bears symbol. And then if I go and run this cute app, I've got this map with my trailheads. I can load this cute app. Actually loaded the style file, and this is actually happening. It's no smoke and mirrors here. And in the style file, I've got my custom symbol, and I just use my custom symbol in my Runtime app. So pretty cool. I think it's cool. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So what about renders? To author renders, if you use ArcGIS Online, you're going to get the smart mapping tools. And the smart mapping tools are made in such a way that you make renderers without even really knowing that you're making renderers. Like, you don't really know what kind of render you just made. ArcGIS Online makes it super easy to create that render. In Pro's, I mean, obviously the advanced tool, right? So you have tons of different renderers to choose from. And if you're going to be publishing a map to the web or creating a mobile map package, there's a set of analyzers that run that'll tell you if the particular renderer that you created is supported or not. In the runtime, you have read-only support for many of the renderers that come from the web maps. We offer an API that allows you to create and modify other renderers. And we also give you programmatic support for raster renderers. And something that I don't know if you know about, it took me a while to understand visual variables. Visual variables are basically they're data-driven visualizations. And what you can do is you could set a visual variable to modify color, size, opacity, or rotation of any symbol in your renderer. And this is the API that's behind the smart mapping. So when you create certain renderers in Pro, so when you create smart mapping renderers on ArcGIS Online, it'll use visual variables to do some of the cool stuff, like when you do the rotation, or if you're doing the counts and amounts renderer, where you have a point symbol on a polygon and it changes its size based on a value. that's a visual variable that's doing that. When you author this in Pro, you basically, to do that same renderer, you would use a graduated symbol renderer. When you publish that to a web map, it becomes a class breaks renderer with a visual variable. So there's conversion tools that go on that you may or may not need to know. You probably don't actually need to know, because when you publish it to the web, Pro will tell you that things have changed. Runtime currently only has read-only support for visual variables. So you have to author visual variables in Pro or through ArcGIS Online, but we are going to bring you a visual variable API soon. So now I'm going to pass it back to Lucas. He's going to show another workflow of creating a specialized map for specifically an offline app. And given what we've already talked about, you might actually know what he's going to demo here.
All right, so in this scenario, it's similar to the navigator use case where somebody wants to go off in the field, completely disconnected, and route to their work location. So in this case, they're going to be working on their smartphone, so it's really important to have a nice looking map. I also want to have labels. So as I zoom in here, I get labels on my streets, which are important for my workers to be able to navigate to their proper location. And I've got things like highway shields. You can see I've got about 7 different layers over here, so it's a pretty simple map, but it looks pretty nice. So I've created this in Pro by creating a new project, right-clicking on Maps, and selecting to add a new base map. I've named that Custom Base Map, and when you do that in your project, you'll see if you go to the base map dropdown, your new base map show up in the base map dropdown. So I've selected that, and I'm using that in my map as my base map. I've also added a streets network data set so I can do my navigation and a locators in the map as well. So if I go to the analysis tools, I can search for create mobile map package. And there's a geoprocessing tool that helps consolidate all the data and the map and create a single file that we can use to transport between different devices. So you just give it an output location, the input locator, and then title, summary, description, tags, and then you run this. And like I said, this will actually consolidate everything you need into this single file. So I've already ran this, and I'm going to run an ArcGIS Runtime app here. Oh, yep, okay. So here I'm looking at this same mobile map. It looks exactly the same in Pro, which is important for me. And you can see as I zoom in, I get labels like I saw in Pro. You'll even notice I set some specific label properties like to follow the roads. So this really complicated name, O'Shaughnessy Boulevard, that follows the line. I've also got some conflict detection. So it's many of the label filters that I've set and properties that I've set in Pro, I'm seeing in ArcGIS Runtime too. And then I'm able to do my routing with the network data set that's provided. So with that, I'll hand it back to Ralf.
Cool. Thanks, Lucas. So Lucas created a map that must work entirely offline. He needed routing, he needed geocoding, and he needed his map to look like Pro, so he used a mobile map package. Another thing we want to talk about is the ArcGIS map image layers. So these used to be called dynamic map services. Now as a system, we're calling them map image layers. So I just wanted to bring them up because I don't want you to forget about them, right? When you use Runtime, Runtime has a subset of functionality than Pro, and ArcGIS Online and the web APIs have a subset of that functionality. So if you have specific functionality that you need, you could always create a map image layer. Like if you have specific labeling requirements, and if you have specific advanced symbols and you want this map to work in ArcGIS Online, then create a map image layer, and the server will produce an image every time you zoom to an extent of the map as it is. Another workflow we want to cover, and I'm going to introduce it first because I want to kind of talk about this particular custom data source workflow. You can create your map, obviously, through Runtime programmatically. It's a little bit more work than just creating a web map through ArcGIS Online or creating it through Pro. But why you might want to do this, and you can honestly mix and match everything. You can create a web map, and then you could add other things to it programmatically and edit it and everything. But if you have a custom data source that's like maybe an RSS feed or some sort of other feed that we don't actually support in the runtime, you could use a feature collection table or a graphics overlay. And if you have your own parser for your data, you could just put it into our data format and just use it in the runtime. Also, to add rasters programmatically to the map, you need to to add raster layers to the map, you need to code that. There isn't really an authoring experience for that yet. So I'm going to pass it over to Daniel, and he's going to do a programmatic map example.
Oh. All right, so this is the app that we have. And so yeah, as Ralf mentioned, say you have a custom data set and there's no way to get it or something like that into ArcGIS, to ArcGIS Online or something like that. So this app will take in some arbitrary data source, and if I press the sync button, we'll start getting some sort of data stream. It should hopefully pop up. There we go. So yeah, this just randomly puts points down on the map. So these points are coming in, coming out, getting deleted. That's like if in a real-time situation, users are adding and deleting points. We can also change these the renderers on these points on the fly, so we can maybe set it to a simple render because we just want to see where the points are versus a unique value render, and we can then we can determine what type of category the points sit or belong to, or even a class breaks render. And so yeah, so how did I do this? So the first thing that I did when I wanted to import in a custom data set is to define a feature collection table. A feature collection table is essentially pretty much just your own custom table schema that you set up for your own data set. So in your own data, you have your, in my case, we have these 5 fields: the name, category, location, date, and comment. So I set up a field for each of the featured collection table, and then I create a new feature collection table from those table schemas that I set up, and then I start putting in points into them. And in order for me to change the renderers on the fly, I need to create these renderers in Runtime. And how I do that is first, so in all of these creating a render, you have to first create the symbols that you want the renderer to display. Then you have to add the renders to then you have to add the symbols to the render, and then set the renders to your layer, or in this case, your feature collection table. So a good example is this unique value render. So first I create an empty unique value render, and I set a how do I want to categorize my unique values. So how do I want the render to decide what symbols get applied to which categories. So the next step is to create a symbol for each of those unique values that will be part of the unique value render. Then I set a default one. This is an optional step. If you want to have a default, you can have it. If you don't need to actually have this step in here. Then I actually add the symbols and the actual unique values to the renderer itself. So I create a list of the first unique value. Then I add that to the unique value renderer along with the symbol that I had created earlier. Then I do that for the rest, and then I set the unique value render onto the renderer. And it's the same thing with class breaks render and all the other types of renders that we support. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Daniel. So the summary is this one is pretty simple. Daniel used a existing map and then programmatically brought in some custom data sources into a feature collection table. So really, that's most of the stuff we had. I have a couple tips and tricks that I wanted to share with you guys. Something to really think about with symbology, because symbology can be kind of complicated. There's essentially, think of 3 levels of complexity with symbology. You've got Pro, which is obviously the most complex. Most symbologies, or most powerful symbol support. And then the web symbology, whenever you're working with the web, you only have simple marker symbols, or simple symbols, right? So if you have a point symbol, a multi-layered point symbol in your pro map, and you want to publish that to the web, what's going to happen in that situation is it's going to be turned into a picture marker symbol. And that picture marker symbol is at 96 dpi. So if you're going to use that same map on a super high-res device, your picture marker symbols, they might look a little fuzzier, right? So that's really one of the main drivers behind why we also allow you to create advanced symbols. If you're working with just desktops, that doesn't really matter. The problem is, though, if you have advanced line symbols like Lucas showed in his demo, where you have arrows that like indicate the direction of the line or whatever, that does not turn into anything because there isn't really a picture symbol for that. So it just becomes a simple symbol. So some of your symbology might not carry over properly unless you're using advanced symbols. So for the runtime, advanced symbols is probably a really good default option for you. But something to also think about, runtime does not support all the symbols that Pro does. So when you're using advanced symbols in the runtime, what happens is that symbol gets vectorized because it could be made up of character marker symbols, which has a bunch of fonts in it that your iPhone doesn't have. Your iPhone doesn't have any of the Esri crime analysis fonts or anything like that. So we vectorize those symbols and turn them into a JSON sort of vector representation of that symbol. And we densify curves because at the moment we don't support curves in the runtime, and we will in the future. And we make the actual symbol RGB. Some of them, like Pro supports all sorts of different kinds of color schemes. Runtime only supports RGB at this time. So, and other things like EMF symbols or something like that, they won't come across. So that's why when I showed the demo earlier with the mobile style, it warned us when we pasted the symbol in there that things are going to get downgraded or changed. And these are the things that happen. So most of your symbols will come over directly and look great. Also, if your picture symbols will stay in the format that they were. So if you have JPEGs or BMPs or whatever, those symbols will stay in that format when you're using advanced symbols. So, and if you have a very high DPI picture, that'll come through in the runtime. Another thing is text. So if you're creating labels, so there is a documentation in the runtime doc, obviously, that tells you exactly how your label properties are going to get converted over to runtime, because obviously runtime is not as powerful as Pro. We don't have the Mapplex label engine on runtime. We have our own label engine, so certain properties don't come over, but most of the important properties do come over. The thing that I want to focus on here, though, too, is the text symbol itself. So if I choose I choose Arial on my map, and I want to have those in my mobile map package, and I want to have those labels show up as Arial on my iPhone or on my Android, that might be a problem because there is no Arial on those devices. I'm not sure about iPhone. I know Android doesn't have Arial. So my text symbols aren't going to look the same, because what runtime will do, if the font that you choose does not exist on the device, we will use the system and fall back to another font. And you start running into problems if you're mixing languages and some of your system fonts don't contain like Korean characters or Japanese characters. We're going to have to keep falling back to try to find a font that actually has that glyph, which every time we do this, there is a performance hit. So it's a good idea to try to think about the device that you're going to be deploying to and what fonts exist on that device. It'll work, you'll get text, but it might not look like the way you expected it to. So that's basically all we got for styling maps. I hope you found this useful. Please feel free to ask us any questions. We'll be here for a little bit. In the back, and then you. The question was, what's the difference between using a feature collection versus a graphics overlay? The feature collection ultimately uses a database behind the scenes, so you can persist the data easier, and you have a schema behind it. Whereas a graphics overlay is you could just put any graphic with any attributes, and you don't even have to like have the same geometry type in the same layer on a graphics overlay. You had a question?
Yeah, I talked with some ArcGIS people, and they said that work is happening right now on creating a new annotation data model, and that's going to get compatible with Google Map packages.
Yeah, the question was, I guess it's more of a comment. Or are you asking when that's available, or?
Well, I'm asking about runtime support.
Yeah. So the question is about a new annotation model, and that you'll be able to author that through a mobile map package. Yeah, I mean, Runtime, the idea, if it's in a mobile map package, Runtime will support it. There is a lot of work that needs to go in to support that, because generally annotation, it renders at a specific scale, and rendering at a specific scale, that's can use up a lot of, it's not an easy thing to do technically. And we're currently in the process of building that functionality. But yeah, annotation in the in a mobile map package would be awesome. So yeah, it's, I don't know when that's going to be done, but definitely being worked on. Yes? Uh-huh. Okay, the question was about vector tile packages and styling vector tiles. So currently with vector tile packages, there isn't really a way for you to author different styles in a vector tile package. You can do this through ArcGIS Online. You could you could reference the same data and host different styles for the vector tile data. I don't know when that's going to be supported, but there's definitely work going on to support that through the VTPK. So it's basically, we need to have a good packaging story so that you could reference different styles, have the same data. So let's say you had a day map and a night map, and you wanted it all in the same vector tile package, be able to swap out the styles. There's work going on for that, but it's not supported currently. No, I understand. Yeah, that would be. I understand that it is being worked on currently. I don't know when we're going to have it though. Sorry. Yes, in the back. You. Yeah. Or sort of back. Medium back. Back from me. The question was, at Runtime version 100, it doesn't support the web map, or he's under the impression that it doesn't support the web map yet. It actually does at version 100. It's web scene that we don't support at version 100. So the 3D version of the web map.
I'll say that in that demo, the only thing that I would need to do in addition, it would have taken too long, especially on this network, but once you publish the web map, you'd have to go to the layers that you want to take offline and mark them as sync enabled. But all of the things that I showed are on released product right now.
The question is it possible to show text with the feature collection table? I mean, you could use a text symbol, but there is no labeling currently at version 100. Labeling is coming at update 1, and a full-blown labeling API would be happening at update 2. But a feature collection table is a feature layer. It's just the data source is the feature collection table versus feature service is the other one, or feature service table? Service feature table. So it's feature layer is ultimately the rendering layer, and then there's different sort of types of feature layers. Feature collection table is one of them, and that's the one that you populate yourself. There is no labeling API for any layers currently, so you wouldn't be able to just dynamically label things. But at update 1, there will be a way to do that. Yes. Lucas, you probably can
Yeah,
answer this better
it's
than
still in design, so nothing's final. But the idea is you give it a web map, an ID, so just a web map ID or a portal item, and it takes the entire thing offline, and you get a mobile map package locally with all of the data that's in it.
Would it be possible to have data points on, for example, geographic extent, min-max, for one specific map, but different extents?
So the question is about having different
Areas of interest.
different areas of interest for one map or multiple maps pointing to the same data.
But different areas of interest.
Oh, is the extent that you want to take offline a parameter of the take map offline?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. We can get back to you on that if you give us your card. But like I said, everything's still in design right now, so nothing's final.
All right, guys. Thank you. Enjoy.